He didn't move to the countryside because he had a plan. He moved because everything he had built his life around was gone. Jude Harper had a business, a home, a routine, the kind of life that looks solid from the outside. And then, within a few short years, he lost both his parents to cancer, one after the other. And instead of doing what most people do, keeping busy, staying numb, letting the routine carry them forward, he made a choice that most of us only ever imagine making. He walked away from all of it, sold the house, closed the business, packed what he could carry, and drove across Scotland with 9 months of savings and no idea what came next. What he built after that, almost nobody saw coming, including him. Here's what makes his story land differently. Jude wasn't escaping failure. He was escaping a life that had actually worked. He founded Stranded Dye Works around 2015, a hand-dyed yarn business that started in his parents' kitchen. And that detail matters more than it sounds, because that kitchen, the exact place where he first learned his craft and mixed his first colors, belonged to the two people he was about to lose. Over nearly 8 years, he turned that kitchen hobby into a respected name in the fiber arts world, a proper studio, a weekly podcast, a loyal following. He had income, structure, purpose. But here's where it gets complicated. When the people who gave your purpose meaning disappear, the whole structure starts to feel like a shell. The orders kept coming, the business kept running, and Jude kept showing up, going through the motions while something underneath had already gone quiet. By 2023, he knew he was in the deepest rut of his life. And more than that, he knew that if he didn't do something drastic, he was going to stay there. But what that drastic thing actually looked like, that's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Most people can wrap their head around losing one parent. It's devastating. It rewires you. But Jude didn't get one call, he got two. His mother was diagnosed first, then before that grief had anywhere near settled, his father followed. Both of them, gone, one after the other. And there's a specific kind of loss that comes not just from losing a person, but from losing the entire world that person represented. Jude's mother was the one he sent photos to every week. Not big announcements, just small pictures, whatever he was working on, whatever he'd fixed or made. A quiet way of saying, here's what I've been up to. And then one day, that ritual just stopped. Not because he chose to end it, because there was no one left to receive it. His father was a man of tools. Hammers, saws, measuring tapes, the kind that live in a shed and carry the weight of decades of use. Those tools would eventually make their way to a stone cottage in rural Scotland that hadn't entered the picture yet, but we'll get there. What matters right now is the full weight of what Jude was carrying. The kitchen where it all started, gone. The woman who received those weekly photos, gone. The man whose tools sat in storage, waiting, gone. And Jude was still standing in the middle of a life that had been built in relationship to people who no longer existed. That's not ordinary grief. That's a complete collapse of context. And the question he found himself sitting with wasn't about colorways or content schedules. It was something much darker. Why am I still doing any of this? In 2024, Jude made a decision that, even by his own account, was completely out of character. He closed Stranded Dye Works after nearly a decade, put the house on the market, and then got in his car and started driving across Scotland with 9 months of savings, no destination, and nothing resembling a plan. No short list of towns, no estate agent, no spreadsheet with pros and cons. Just a recently bereaved, recently unemployed man driving through the Scottish countryside looking for somewhere that didn't feel like the life he was leaving behind. And here's what makes that even more striking. Jude has described himself as someone who normally has backup plans for his backup plans. Methodical, measured, someone who thinks things through. This time, he had nothing. Just savings that would last roughly 9 months and an open road. He looked at properties across Inverness, the Isle of Skye, the West Coast, parts of Aberdeenshire, and then something stopped him. A small stone cottage in rural Aberdeenshire. Thick walls, low ceilings, an attached barn that needed serious structural work. Less than an acre of land, water from a well, heat from a fireplace. The nearest neighbor was a complete stranger who had no idea the new arrival had just dismantled his entire life to be there. Jude moved in with what he could carry and a head full of uncertainty. He described it as simultaneously freeing and terrifying. And in one of the more honest things he said about the whole experience, it's easy to stay miserable because staying miserable feels like the safer option. He chose the harder one, and the clock started the moment he unpacked. Now, here's what the comfortable version of this story would look like. Man moves to the countryside, finds peace, bakes bread by the fire, develops a photogenic morning routine. That version doesn't exist. The first weeks in that cottage were, by Jude's own account, genuinely awful. He didn't know how a septic tank worked, had no experience managing a private water supply, no background in construction or plumbing, no knowledge of rural land management, and not a single contact in the area. He was completely alone in the middle of northeastern Scotland in a building that was actively falling apart around him. There were nights when something fell down the chimney and smoke filled the cottage, weeks with no running water because the well ran dry and he was surviving on bottled water. No hot water for stretches at a time, and every time he stepped outside, there was more work staring back at him. The barn was deteriorating, the land was overgrown, his savings were draining week by week, whether anything got fixed or not, and the silence had weight. No colleagues, no casual conversation, no background noise of a shared life. Just wind, stone walls, and the slow realization that wanting a fresh start and actually surviving one are two very different things. For about 2 weeks, he genuinely believed he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But here's what kept him moving when every rational reason to quit was stacking up against him. In that shed full of his father's tools, the hammers, the saws, the measuring tapes, Jude had something no amount of money or planning could have given him. Every time he reached for one of those tools, he was holding something his father had held, building something new with the instruments of a man who was gone. That shed didn't just hold equipment, it held the closest thing to company he had. He called what he was doing rewilding, not just the land, but himself, stripping everything back to find out what was still alive underneath. Remember those weekly photos Jude used to send his mother? When she died, that ritual ended, but the impulse behind it didn't. The need to show someone, to share the small wins, the progress, the mess of everyday making, that need was still there. It just had nowhere to go. So Jude picked up a camera. He had some experience from the stranded dyeworks days, so filming wasn't entirely foreign, but this was completely different in intention. He wasn't building a brand or marketing a product. He was a man who had lost the people he used to share his life with, trying to find another way to keep that impulse alive. He started uploading videos under the name Rewilding Jude, just filming his days, the cottage, the projects, the failures, the small wins. The first few videos barely registered. Then came his third upload, a simple walkthrough of the cottage. No production value, no script. Just Jude moving through the stone rooms of this rundown place he had staked everything on. He thought maybe a few hundred people from his old knitting community might watch it. That video has since crossed 400,000 views, and what actually drove the growth wasn't aesthetics or algorithm tricks, it was the disasters. Jude doesn't edit out his mistakes. He leaves them in because, as he puts it, otherwise the videos would be very short. A chicken coop planned for 3 weeks that took 3 months. Himself staring blankly at a tape measure because he had forgotten how to process basic numbers. Wrong cuts, structures torn down and rebuilt from scratch. 4 to 5 days of filming every week. No production team, no second takes. People started writing comments that ran to paragraphs, sharing their own stories of loss, of starting over, of finding something in his footage they hadn't been able to put into words. The channel crossed 150,000 subscribers and over 10 million total views. And that comment section doesn't read like a typical YouTube comment section. It reads more like a support group built around a man and his crumbling cottage. Because what audiences responded to wasn't the renovation content. It was the fact that someone on the internet was visibly genuinely trying and visibly genuinely not always getting it right. In a space full of performed competence, Jude's willingness to look lost on camera turned out to be the most compelling thing he could have offered. Among the most unexpectedly meaningful parts of this whole story are 4 hens. Rescued through the British Hen Welfare Trust, a charity that has rehomed over 1 million commercially farmed birds across the UK. These were chickens that had been days away from slaughter when Jude brought them home to that over-engineered 3-month palace of a coop. He had never kept hens before, and then something happened that he genuinely didn't anticipate. The chickens wrecked him, in the best possible way. He's described them as the most unexpectedly joyful thing to arrive in his life since the move. And if you sit with that for a moment, it hits harder than it probably should. A man who lost both parents, who drove across a country with no destination, who stood alone in a smoke-filled cottage, wondering if he'd destroyed his own life. That man is now, every morning, walking out to a coop he built with his own hands, using his father's tools, to care for 4 birds that would have been dead without him. Animals given a second chance by someone quietly in the middle of his own. Today, every Sunday without fail, a new video goes up. He's built raised garden beds, grown and harvested vegetables, foraged from the land, torn down parts of the cottage and rebuilt them from scratch, cooked meals from food he grew himself, lit fires with wood he cut himself. Everything he has built, he figured out as he went. The raised beds came after failed attempts. The hoop house came after understanding what a Scottish winter does to an exposed garden. All of it learned on the job, in real time, on camera, with the mistakes left in. No shortcuts, just accumulated skill, built slowly through repetition and failure and trying again. Because here is what becomes clear when you follow the whole arc of this story. The work was never really about the cottage. It was about having something that demanded his presence, something that required his hands, his attention, his problem-solving, his patience. Something that made him move when grief had made standing still feel like the only option. He went from running a business that had lost its meaning to building a life that, slowly, imperfectly, and sometimes disastrously, is finding it again. Not in one dramatic turning point, one project at a time, one wrong measurement at a time, one Sunday video at a time, one rescued hen at a time. And every Sunday, he picks up the camera, walks through the cottage, the garden, the coop, shows the world what he's been working on that week. The repairs, the disasters, the small things that went right. Over 10 million people have watched. Strangers from everywhere, tuning in every week to see what Jude's been up to. Which means every Sunday, Jude is essentially doing the same thing he was doing when he sent those photos to his mother, showing someone what he's been working on. The person he built that habit for is gone, but the habit itself refused to die. It just found a new address. And there's something in that worth sitting with for a long time.